Hello, welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of the National Transit Institute, I welcome you and thank you for participating. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. Today's webinar is based on the NTD Annual Reduced Reporting in the Urban module. We are pleased to have as our presenters today Matt Oliver and Brandon Parker. Matt Oliver joined the NTD team in 2008. He holds an MA and a BA from the University of Virginia and currently serves as the operations manager for the NTD validation team. Brandon Parker serves as a validation analyst for the Urban National Transit Database module. He joined the team after graduating from Radford University in 2015. Today's webinar will consist of presentation of the material with Q&A at the end. So you have the option of either typing your question into the Q&A box as it occurs to you during the course of the presentation, or waiting until the end. If you don't see the Q&A box, there should be a menu bar either at the top or the bottom of your screen, and it's an option. Click it says Q&A, and it toggles that on and off. You can just type your question in there, and I will read them aloud at the end, and they will be answered in the order that they came in. If you don't have a copy of the presentation handout, which should have been emailed to you, in a second when I'm done blabbing here, I will paste the link in the chat box. It should have been there already, but I forgot to do it, so it will be there shortly. I think that covers everything, and I will now turn the presentation over to Matt and Brandon.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Transit Database webinar for reduced reporters. Thank you very much for joining us today. Here is the contact information for the National Transit Database. At any point you require technical assistance while completing your report or accessing our published data products, please feel free to call or email our help desk line between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. My name is Matt Oliver, and I am joined by Brandon Parker, who will also be presenting today. Our contact information is listed here if you have any questions about this presentation, or you can also contact your assigned analyst. Here is the agenda for this afternoon. We will review the basic policies of NTD reporting, including a reporting overview, as well as touching on some policy clarifications and new requirements for this year. We will then discuss how to get started in the NTD 2.0 reporting system, how to kick off and complete the annual report, how to submit the report through the system, and we will briefly review the validation and revision processes. First, we will begin with an overview of the NTD. Who reports to the NTD? Agencies that are recipients or beneficiaries of FTA 5307 Urbanized Area Formula Program Funds or FTA 5311 Rural Area Formula Program Funds are required to report to the NTD. In 2018, with the implementation of a new TAM rule, any recipients of Chapter 53 funds are required to report to the NTD if they operate public service. These agencies are public transportation providers that may include direct transit providers, state departments of transportation and their subrecipients, as well as metropolitan planning organizations, MPOs. Transit agencies are welcome to report their public transit data to the NTD on a voluntary basis, even if they do not currently receive these funds. The data from these reports contributes to apportionments for their urbanized areas or UZAs. Within the urban module of the NTD, reduced reporters are transit agencies who operate 30 or fewer vehicles in their peak maximum service. They also do not operate any fixed guideway, such as rail or fixed catenary systems. For those who report as reduced reporters, these agencies do not report data related to passenger miles in their service. They also do not report monthly service statistics or any monthly safety data. Agencies have 4 months after their fiscal year ends to complete their NTD reports. For example, If your fiscal year ends on June 30th, the deadline for submission is October 31st, and the report must be closed out or finalized by March 15th of the following year. We have three primary groups of fiscal year reporting deadlines listed here in the table. Next, we will cover what to report. Agencies must report all public transportation services, whether they're operated by your agency directly or contracted out as purchased transportation. Public transit must be regular, continuing, shared ride, and open to the public or a segment of the public, such as seniors or persons with disabilities. Report all assets, expenditures, and service data associated with these services. In your financial data, you should report the total annual costs of your service, regardless of whether it was federally or locally funded. And you should only report services for which your agency is responsible for covering the full cost. You must report data that is specific to each mode and type of service you operate, such as bus, demand response, van pool, and so on. Be sure to collect and report service and financial data by each separate mode. Additionally, ensure you report actual data rather than data that is based on calculations or estimates. You must report all direct as well as indirect expenses related to the service. Also, regardless of funding source. Here is the general flow of the NTD reporting process. All agencies begin with reporting training and familiarizing themselves with the NTD policy manual. They then compile and collect their data once their fiscal year ends. They enter it into the NTD system and submit their first report, and their assigned analysts will review the data and send it back with revisions or requested clarifications. Once the report is finalized, it is sent to FTA for approval. The data is used in the apportionment formula funding the following year, and the data is eventually published on the NTD website for the general public to use. Next, we'll discuss the changes and clarifications for the 2019 report year. The first clarification is for the reporting eligibility of commuter service. FTA has clarified that service is considered commuter service if at least 50% of the passengers make a return trip on the same day across all service runs for 1 year. Agencies reporting any new commuter service with one-way trips that exceed 90 minutes must submit a survey to the NTD to show that their service meets this criteria. Next, we have a clarification on the reporting eligibility for temporary bus bridge service. If one reported mode provides a substitute service for another reported mode, agencies must report the financial and service data under the mode that is providing the service. When a temporary bus bridge uses a new mode or type of service, the agency is not required to add it to their report. However, they may add it if they so choose. If the new mode is added, the agency must adhere to all NTD requirements set forth in the policy manual. The next clarification is for the reporting eligibility for evacuation or disaster service. FDA has clarified that services provided in direct response to a natural disaster or part of an evacuation effort are not considered public transit. These services are not regular and continuing and therefore do not meet the definition for public transit. Financial and service data for these services should not be included in NTD reporting. Lastly, for eligibility clarifications, we will cover services provided by transportation network companies. Agencies reporting to the NTD and contracting with a transportation network company, or TNC, for on-demand shared mobility services must include data for this service in their NTD reports if it is public transit. The contract between the agency and the TNC must meet NTD criteria for purchase transportation, and the service must be regular and continuing and shared ride. For reportable examples, please refer to the appendix of the NTD policy manual. In any cases of this, please contact and discuss them with your analyst. On the D10 form, agencies must now indicate if they use data collected with automatic passenger counters, or APCs. If APCs are used, agencies must indicate which method they use to collect the data. There's a new method on the D10 form shown on the next slide. Select the checkbox if APC data was used and then review options A through E and select the appropriate method. Please note that agencies using APC data to report data to the NTD must submit an APC certification application for review. Next, we will cover changes and clarifications related to the asset module. FTA has clarified that passenger stations no longer have to be enclosed to meet station criteria. Significant structures are now considered to meet station criteria. Please review the updated station criteria in the NTD policy manual and update your A10 form and A15 accordingly. Related to the A15 form, all passenger facilities must be inventoried, regardless of capital responsibility, if they are used in revenue service. This includes passenger, parking facilities, and passenger stations. Parking facilities include things such as parking structures as well as parking lots. To better reflect passenger stations for all modes, FTA has added a new facility for ferryboat modes. On the A15 form, ferryboat terminal is now an option for agencies that service ferryboat docks or terminals. Please be sure to update your facilities inventory properly. On the A15 form, administrative and maintenance facilities must be inventoried only if the agency has capital responsibility for the facility and the transit use is greater than incidental. FTA has clarified that the threshold for incidental use is 50% or less of the facility's physical space, or in the case of maintenance facilities, agencies may use the number of transit vehicles serviced at the facility compared to the total number of vehicles serviced to determine if the use is incidental. For example, if a city has a public works maintenance facility that services 5 transit vehicles as well as 100 other vehicles for the city, the agency can do simple math to determine that this facility is incidentally used for transit and therefore does not need to be reported. For condition assessments for the A15 form, agencies are not required to report assessments for facilities that are under construction. The condition assessment should be reported once the construction is complete. For any facilities that are still being used in revenue service while under construction, these should still be inventoried on the form, but the assessment can be reported once the construction is complete. On the A30 form, FTA has introduced a new field for all vehicle fleets to collect information on autonomous vehicles. For all existing fleets and any new fleets, please identify any autonomous vehicles by selecting the checkbox. For this purpose, FTA has defined an autonomous vehicle as one that is capable of performing all driving functions without human input under certain conditions. Here, you can see the checkbox that you should select if the vehicles in a particular fleet were autonomous vehicles. Also, on the A30 form, FTA has revised the options for the type of last renewal field. Midlife powertrain overhaul has been removed as an option, and now the remaining options are midlife vehicle overhaul and life extending rebuild. For any vehicle fleets that have undergone a renewal, please select the appropriate type on the form. For the service vehicle inventory, or A35 form, FTA has clarified that agencies should report a representative sample fleet of vehicles if they are using service vehicles that are pulled from a pool of non-dedicated agency-owned fleets. These are cases where the service vehicles are not specific or assigned to transit, but may be used as needed to support transit service. The reporting of a representative sample fleet is similar to the reporting of non-dedicated revenue fleets on the A30 form. For the estimate cost field on the 835, FTA has clarified that the intent of this field is to capture the cost of a comparable fleet. It should represent a reasonable estimate to replace the current asset type, allowing for moderate increases in costs due to inflation or improvements in technology. It should not represent planning costs or significant changes in asset type. If no recent cost estimate has been developed, agencies should report the original cost of the asset. Lastly, for the A35, FDA has clarified the definition of service vehicles. Service vehicles are reported if they are self-propelled and either roadworthy or major pieces of construction equipment. Next, we'll take a look at a transit asset management phase-in schedule. For report year 2019, you can see here that you are required to report your fiscal year 2020 targets, report condition data on vehicles, including revenue and service vehicles, and you are required to report condition assessments for 50% of your facilities for which you have capital responsibility. The narrative report is also required for report year 2019. If your agency has a transit asset management or TAM plan, you can upload the document to the A90 Performance Measures Target Form. This document may include any changes in transit system conditions that may affect progress towards the targets set in your TAM plan. For further guidance on the narrative report, please refer to the TAM website. The next item we will discuss is the Independent Auditor Statement for Financial Data, also known as the IASFD. This audit is a review of the agency's accounting system to determine whether or not the agency can meet NTD financial reporting requirements. This was required in report year 2018 for agencies that did not have an IASFD within the last 10 years. But if your agency received a waiver last year, the IASFD documentation is due for report year 2019 at the time of the original submission. There were a couple of changes to the RR20 form back in report year 2018. Number one, you will report on fare revenues by the specific type of passenger paid fares or organizational paid fares, but will still report a total amount of fare revenues expended. Number two, the donations line has been removed. And lastly, number three, the contract revenue line item has been removed from the form. Now we will review some key points to remember. NTD follows accrual accounting principles. What that means is that revenues are recorded when earned, regardless of whether or not the receipt of revenue takes place in the same reporting period. Expenses are recorded when the liability occurs, regardless of when the payment is made. For example, if a passenger purchases $10 worth of fares, but only uses 5 of those fares in that month, the agency would recognize and report only $5 of passenger fares, as that is the portion earned at the fiscal year end. Following the accrual accounting path, total expenses will be broken down between two types, operating and capital. Operating expenses are day-to-day expenses related to operating and maintaining vehicles, equipment, and buildings, along with any general admin costs. Some examples of these operating costs are fuel for vehicles, salaries, wages, and benefits for transit-related employees, along with the rest listed here. For agencies with multiple modes, some expenses are hard to trace back to a specific mode. So if an agency operates more than one mode, the total amount of operating expenses must be reported as direct and indirect by mode. Direct expenses need to be reported for a particular mode. These can include bus passes or labor or fuel costs. And indirect expenses, like maintenance costs for shared vehicles or building maintenance costs, need to be determined aside from direct expenses. Once indirect expenses have been identified, they can be allocated between the modes based on a reliable service data point like vehicle revenue miles. Capital expenses are related to purchases of transit equipment like vehicles or maintenance facilities. This means non-expendable personal property that has a useful life of over 1 year or acquisition cost of over $5,000 or the capitalization level established by your organization. If you have a capital expense where both modes utilize that asset, please report the capital expense to the mode that the asset supports the majority of the time. Here are some key NTD reference documents, including our glossary, user guide for the reporting system, and the updated uniform system of accounts. You can find these on our website, linked directly here in the presentation. We have new reference materials, including a reduced reporting policy manual, which is specifically for reduced reporters. Please note, we have also compiled a frequently asked questions page, which you can find on our homepage. If you have any suggestions for the frequently asked questions page, please feel free to reach out to your analyst. Now we will cover the NTD 2.0 reporting system. This is the homepage for those who aren't familiar. It's transit.dot.gov/NTD. There are 2 links on this page that will allow you to access the reporting system, one on the left and one in the middle right of the page. Once you log in, you will land on the NTD newsfeed. You will see updates and notifications from the NTD team here. While the system does include a means to enter comments or provide kudos to analysts, please do not use this as a platform to contact your analysts with reporting questions. Please always email them or give them a call. You can access your annual report, agency profile, and your system's users through the Records tab at the top of the page. The agency profile section is a frequently accessed part of the NTD system. This houses data that typically doesn't change from year to year, such as your basic information, the modes you operate, the users who need access to the report, and historical reports. You can access the profile by hitting the Records tab at the top of the page, then My NTD Report Profiles. Next, you will select your agency's profile link. You will then land on the profile summary page. This page contains your analyst name, phone number, and email addresses, as well as your agency's basic information. At the top of the profile section, the e-file library contains historical requests like extension requests or agency fiscal year updates. The form library contains your agency's reports from previous years. If you need to access the 2018 report for reference while completing the 2019 report, do this through the form library. The related actions allows you to edit your agency's profile information, like your basic information, modes, or users. To edit modes, select related actions and then select the View and Manage Reporter Modes link for the P20 form. If you'd like to add a new mode to your agency profile, select Add Mode at the bottom of this screen. You will not need to add the same mode year over year, as this data will be retained in the system. Select the mode from a drop-down menu such as bus, demand response, etc. Select whether the service is directly operated by your agency or contracted out as purchased transportation. Enter the commitment date, which is when your agency is first committed to capital funds towards the mode, and enter the start date, which is the first day of revenue service. Do not enter an end date if the service is still in operation. Only enter an end date if the service has been terminated. Please note that agencies cannot delete modes from a profile once they've been added. You may edit modes directly in this form by selecting the field you wish to update. You may add an end date if the service has ceased operations, or update the commitment or start dates if needed. Lastly, we will review the user roles for our agency users in the NTD system. The user roles are as follows: CEO, NTD contact, editor, viewer, and CEO delegate if applicable. The CEO delegate role is optional for all agencies that require FTA approval. CEOs and CEO delegates have the highest level of access and permissions in the system, including the ability to create reporter requests like waiver or extension requests. CEOs have the ability to submit the report as well as view and edit report forms and issues. NTD Contact have the same permissions as CEOs aside from creating reporter requests and submitting the original submission or the first draft of the report. Editors may only revise and save forms, while viewers may only view the form. You may disregard the safety roles like safety contact or safety editor, as Urban reduced reporters do not report safety data through the monthly safety module. Beginning in calendar year 2019, reporters will have to certify all their users when they begin to report. All user managers must do this. This is consistent among all FTA FACES applications such as TRANS and ECHO. Please consult the FACES user guide on the FTA's program website for more information. Next, we'll jump into starting the report year. The first step in completing the annual report is completing the report year kickoff. This process officially launches the current report year. After your fiscal year ends, your agency CEO and NTD contact will receive a task in the system to complete the kickoff. This process will generate the report package for the year after you confirm your agency's information. First, the CEO or NTD contact will select the task tab. You will complete the 2020 report year kickoff in order to generate the 2019 report package forms. You will need to accept the task and then hit proceed. The first step in this process is confirming or editing your agency's users for the year. You can add users or edit existing contact information as needed. The next step is confirming or editing your agency's mode for the year. You can add new modes if you started a new service, or you can end modes if a service has ceased operation in the past year. Please do not update this section to reflect your fiscal year. This is a common reporting mistake. The next step is managing your 2019 Transit Asset Management Group Plan sponsor. If you are participating in a group transit asset management plan, confirm the sponsor from 2018 here. If you're completing your own transit asset management plan, you can simply click continue. If you need to remove the sponsor from last year or select a new one, please contact your analyst. Next, you'll confirm your reporter type for 2019. If you were a small systems reporter last year, ensure that no is selected under the change type, as your reporter type will not be changed. Select the same answer for your 2020 reporter type and submit to complete the report year kickoff. This will generate your 2019 report package forms. The system typically takes a couple of minutes to complete this function, so be sure to check your forms after allowing a little time. Next, we will review annual report form navigation in the system. To access your 2019 report package, first select Records at the top of the page, then NTD Report Packages. You will then select the 2019 report package link. Once the report package summary page opens, select Annual Forms in the top right-hand corner. This will open the list of report package forms. You can select any form link to open it. This is the list of forms you will see in your report package, which we will review one by one. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Brandon Parker.
Good afternoon, everyone. The first form in each report package is a B10 identification form. The first step on this form is to select your agency's organization type from the drop-down menu. Examples of available organization types include city, county, or local government unit, or independent public agency or authority of transit service. After you have selected your agency's organization type, you will report your demographic information. This includes service area square miles and service area population. The data points for service area should represent your agency's true service area for transit and not the data for your particular urbanized area. To complete your demographic information, you will report data related to your urbanized areas, or UZAs. Your primary UZA will be pre-populated in the form. You can add secondary urbanized areas as applicable by clicking the Add UZA button. If your agency has any modes that will be captured in another NTD report, you'll report them in the Modes Filing Separately section. If this does not apply to your agency, please leave the section blank. Please consult your list before adding any new modes found separately on this form. Lastly, if your agency owns any capital assets that are used in another NTD report or service, you will report the agency where they are used in the separate asset section of each form. Again, if this does not apply to your agency, please leave this section blank. Next, we will cover the B30 contractual relationship form. The B30 form captures information about contractual relationships. These are relationships where transit service is provided to an agency or government unit from a public or private transportation provider based on a written contract. The buyer of service will be the transit agency that pays another entity to perform service. Please note, if the buyer of service only pays a portion of the cost to operate service, it should not be reported as a contract. The seller of service will be the entity that provides service on behalf of another agency. The seller may be a public or private entity. The NTD has specific criteria for service that may be reported as a contract. The criteria are as follows. A written agreement exists that, number one, obligates the seller to provide the operations for a specific monetary consideration. Number two, specifies a contractual relationship for a certain time period in service. Number three, obligates the seller to provide the buyer the operating statistics required by the NTD annual report. And number four, the authorized representatives of both the buyer and seller sign the written agreement. Buyers must pay the full cost of service in order to report the service as a contract to the NTD. Also, the service must be branded under the transit agency buying service. In order to add a B30 form to your report package, you will click on the Add Contractual Relationship button at the top of your report package summary dashboard. All B30s from previous report years will generate during your report year kickoff as a part of your report package. Since report year 2018, there are two types of B30 forms, one for van pool modes and one for all non-van pool modes. Once you have selected Add Contractual Relationship, the first step is to select whether the contractual relationship is with another agency, reports to the NTD, or is a private company. Then you will click Continue. If your B30 is with another NTD reporter, you must select the contracted agency from a list generated by the NTD database. You can also search for the provider in the search bar. At the top of the B30 form is the contract summary. The first selection is to make your contractual position. This indicates whether your agency is the buyer of service or seller of service. Once you have selected your position, you will report whether the contract was negotiated or passively bid. This should refer to when the contract was awarded, even if the option years have been exercised. Then you select the primary feature of the contract. How does the buyer compensate the seller? There are two options. The buyer pays the seller a negotiated fixed rate per unit of service, or the buyer reimburses the seller's net operating expenses based on an approved budget. You select one of these options from the drop-down menu. Next, you indicate whether the service statistics will be reported in your NTD report or another NTD report. If you are reporting the service data in your own NTD report, select the In This Report option. If another entity reporting agency will be capturing the service data provided in the contract, select In Another Report. Then you will indicate whether the seller keeps the fares or the seller returns the fares collected to the buyer. The last selection for the contract summary is to indicate any public assets provided and served by the buyer, if applicable. These may be vehicles, maintenance facilities, or other public assets. If you select Other, you'll be required to provide a description of the public assets provided. The next section of the B30 form is where you will add each mode provided as a part of the contract. These modes do not carry over from year to year and must be added to your B30 form each new report year. You may only add active modes from your P20 form or modes listed as filing separately in your B10 form. You will click the Add New Mode and Type of Service button at the bottom left of the form to add modes. Then you'll select the appropriate mode and type of service from the drop-down and click Edit on the right-hand column to open up the Key Financial and Operating Statistics fields. There are several parts of the Key Financial and Operating Statistics section. First, you report the number of vehicles operated in maximum service, or VOMs. This should represent the highest number of vehicles operated at any given point during the year, excluding special events or atypical service days. Then, you will indicate how many months the seller provided service during the report year. Next, you will report the amount of fare revenues generated by the service. You should report the total amount of fares collected, regardless of whether the buyer or seller retained the fares. Then, we will report the total payment to the contractor in the direct payment line. This should be the total amount paid directly from the buyer to the seller without netting out any capital leasing or other expenses. Next, you'll indicate the amount of capital leasing expenses for the contract. Capital leasing costs are expenses that the seller charges the buyer for use of capital assets, such as vehicles or maintenance facilities. If the buyer provides all of the assets, this does not apply. If you are the buyer of service, you will record any cost your agency incurs for overseeing the contract under the Other Operating Expenses incurred by the buyer field. This should include general administration costs to oversee the contract and any other applicable expenses. Lastly, you will report any leases and rentals expenses in the Other Reconciling Item Expenses incurred by the buyer field. This will be for expenses such as vehicle rentals. The next form we will review is the A10 Stations and Maintenance Facilities form. On this form, you will begin by reporting data on your agency's passenger stations. You will report the number of ADA accessible and non-accessible stations, as well as the number of elevators and escalators in your stations. Passenger stations must be significant structures in separate right-of-way in order to be reportable. Please note, bus stops or bus shelters do not count as passenger stations. Next, you will report a count of your agency's maintenance facilities used to report revenue service. This will include any owned or leased maintenance facilities. You will report the facilities by ownership type, facility type, and capacity. If your agency uses one maintenance facility for multiple modes, you will need to prorate the facility based on the amount of vehicles and services. For example, if an agency operates a demand response mode and a bus mode that use the same maintenance facility, this facility will need to be prorated between the A10 forms for each mode. If the agency owns 20 vehicles total, 15 of which are used for demand response, and 5 of which are used for bus, the demand response A10 form will reflect 75% of the facility, and the bus A10 form will reflect 25% of the facility. This is determined by taking the number of vehicles for each mode and dividing by the number of total vehicles for all modes. Now we'll talk about the A15 facilities and inventory form. In the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory, or A15 form, you will report all administrative and maintenance facilities for which you have capital replacement responsibility and greater than incidental use, as well as all passenger stations that your agency uses in revenue service, regardless of capital replacement responsibility. A few common examples of facility types are administrative buildings, which are the offices that house executive management and supporting activities for transit operations, combined administrative and maintenance facilities, which are facilities that combine the functions of both an administrative and maintenance facility, and finally, maintenance facilities. These are facilities where routine and heavy maintenance on vehicles is performed. When adding a new facility to the A15 form, you will need to complete all required fields, which we will review. To get started, click Add New. There will be 3 sections to fill out for each facility: facility information, condition assessment, and address. Clicking Add New will first bring you to the Update Facility Information section, where you will click on Add Facility. Next, you will fill out the name of the facility. You can name it whatever you like that makes it easily identifiable to you. Then you will fill out the primary mode that this facility serves. If the facility serves more than one mode, you should choose a primary mode that it predominantly serves. In the next field, you can identify any other mode served as secondary mode. Secondary mode should be added for any other modes that the facility serves, or can be left blank if it does not serve any other modes. The secondary mode field is not a drop-down menu, so you will need to start typing before options appear. Next, you can identify any private modes that share use of the facility. The options for these non-public transit modes are airport, private bus, private rail, and private water transit. An example of private bus would be Greyhound, or an example of private rail would be Amtrak. Here you will choose the facility type from the drop-down menu. You should select the facility type that fits your facility best. A list of facility type descriptions is available in the policy manual starting on page 97. If you have questions about which facility type you should select, please contact your analyst. You will then report the year that the facility was built or reconstructed, the square footage, number of parking spaces, percentage of your agency's capital responsibility, and any notes you deem necessary. Next, you should click Continue to go to the Condition Assessment section of the form. Here you will report the condition assessment for the facility on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being excellent and 1 being poor. If you do not have a condition assessment for the facility, please select NA from the drop-down menu. If you would like guidance on how to complete the condition assessment, please refer to the TAM Facility Performance Measure Reporting Guidebook, which can be found on the NTD's website. Once you have selected a condition assessment rating, you should select the estimated date on which you conducted this assessment. Lastly, you should click the Update Address tab or click Continue to fill out the facility's address information. You may report either the street address of the facility or the longitude and latitude. Once all the information has been added, you can click Continue to add facility to your A15 form. You can review or edit information for any of your facilities by clicking on the facility name from the main A15 landing summary page. Now we will review the A30 Revenue Vehicle Inventory form. Each year, you should review and update the A30 form by adding any new vehicles or retiring any vehicles that are no longer in service at your agency. The form will pre-populate all revenue vehicle fleets from the previous report year. If you need to add a new fleet, you will select the Add New Fleet button. First, you report the basic information about the fleet. If there are multiple vehicles in a fleet, these vehicles should be identical across all specifications. You will select the vehicle type from the drop-down menu of options. Then you will report the number of total vehicles and active vehicles in the fleet. Active vehicles should include all vehicles that are available to provide revenue service, including spares. Next, you will select ownership type. This will include options such as owned or leased and whether the vehicles are owned or leased by a public agency or private entity. Then you will select the funding type. This should represent the largest funding source for the vehicle fleet. There are several options for funding type, including FTA grant programs, other federal funds, and non-federal funds. If you do not have capital responsibility for the fleet, you should check the No Capital Replacement Responsibility box. New for report year 2019, if vehicles in a fleet can operate without any human input, you should check the Automated or Autonomous Vehicles box. This section will not apply to the majority of reporters. Once you have entered the basic information, you report the vehicle information. This includes the fleet's model, length, seating and standing capacity, fuel type, manufacturer, and year manufactured. Some vehicles may have multiple manufacturers. Agencies must report the final manufacturer and model. For example, for a cutaway vehicle, you should report the cutaway body, manufacturer, and model. Since that is the final manufacturer of the vehicle, you should not report the manufacturer model of the vehicle's chassis. If you have questions about how to report these data points for your fleets, please contact your analyst for guidance. As a note, if your agency reports a year of rebuild for a vehicle fleet, you will also now be required to indicate the type of rebuild that was performed. In each vehicle fleet, you will see useful life benchmark as well as useful life remaining in the vehicle information section. Useful life benchmark is the expected life cycle or the acceptable period of use and service for an asset, as determined by your agency or the default benchmark provided by FTA. Please note that this measure takes into account your unique operating environment, including your geographic location, the frequency of your service, and your climate. Because of this, useful life benchmark is not the same as useful life for FTA grant programs, which typically defines the minimum age at which equipment can be retired. Useful life benchmark will automatically populate a default value when you select the vehicle type. For example, the vehicle type for this fleet is selected as bus. The standard useful life benchmark for buses, as defined by FTA, is 14 years. Thus, a value of 14 will populate in this field. Agencies have the option to report a value that is different from the default. Useful life remaining will automatically populate when you report the year a fleet was manufactured. In this example, since this fleet was manufactured in 2014, it has been in service for 5 years as of 2019. If the useful life benchmark for buses is 14 years, then the fleet will have 9 useful life years remaining. Please note that the useful life remaining is not an editable field. This value is calculated based on the year manufactured in the useful life benchmark fields. Lastly, you will report the mileage information. This includes miles this year, which should reflect all mileage incurred by the fleet during the fiscal year, and average lifetime miles, which is the average total mileage per active vehicle in the fleet. Average lifetime miles can be calculated for the current report year in 2 ways. If the prior year's average lifetime miles were accurate, you can divide the miles this year value by the number of active vehicles in your fleet and add that result to the previous year's average lifetime miles. Otherwise, you can simply take the average of all ending odometer readings for the active vehicles in a fleet if the odometers have worked properly for the entire lives of the vehicles. If you need to edit an existing fleet, you will first click on the link of the Fleet's Revenue Vehicle Inventory, or RVID. This will open a drop-down where you can then be able to update any fields as necessary. A new feature that was added in Report Year 2017 is the ability to add an existing fleet onto your A30 form. For agencies that share fleets between modes, you will now be able to copy fleets from one A30 to another by selecting the Add Existing Fleet option. The system will populate all fleets that may be shared between modes. If a fleet is no longer in service and needs to be retired, you should not delete the fleet from the A30 form. What you should do is change your active vehicles value to 0, and then select Yes for the Is this fleet retired question that will pop up in the bottom right-hand corner of your fleet details. If a fleet is out for repairs and will be coming back into service, you should still update active vehicle to 0, but you should select No to the Is this fleet retired question. Fleets should only be deleted from the A30 form if they were accidentally added to the report. If needed, you can delete a fleet by clicking on the red X next to the fleet entry. Next, we will cover the A35 service vehicle inventory form. The A35 form is where you report your agency's non-renting vehicles that support your service. You should report all service vehicles for which your agency has capital responsibility. Service vehicles are roadworthy, self-prepared, or major pieces of construction equipment that support revenue operations, maintain revenue vehicles, or perform transit-oriented administrative activities. Similar to the A30 form, you can group service vehicles fleets by vehicles that are identical across all specifications. Such vehicles are grouped into 3 vehicle types: automobiles, trucks and other rubber-tired vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. This form is not specific to modes, so you will only be required to complete one A35 form. To add a new service fleet, first click Add New. Then click Add Service Fleet at the bottom left-hand side of the form. The first section of fleet information is the Service Fleet Information tab. You will report the fleet name and agency fleet ID. These can be names and IDs that make fleet easily identifiable for your agency. Similar to the A15 form, you must select the primary mode that the fleet supports. You can also report secondary modes as applicable. Then you will select the vehicle type for the fleet from the drop-down menu. Description of these 3 vehicle types are available in the policy manual starting on page 119. Next, you will enter the number of total vehicles in the fleet. The useful life benchmark field will populate when you select the vehicle type. You may choose to enter your own figure in the useful life benchmark field. Click Next section to go to the next page, where you will report your agency's capital stability percentage for the fleets. Lastly, the estimated cost for the vehicle fleet in the year's dollars of estimated cost. For the estimated cost, you should report the full cost to replace the fleet, including soft costs such as financing charges. This value should be the most recent value the agency has, whether that is the original cost of the assets or the insured value. The year dollars estimated cost figure is the year that your estimate is from. If you're using the original cost of the asset and it was purchased in 2012, your year dollars would be 2012. Next is the A90 performance measure targets form. On the A90 form, you report targets for your asset performance in the upcoming fiscal year. This form compares data from the current report year asset forms to the targets entered in the prior report year. This year, you are also required to submit a narrative report that outlines your agency's progress towards your performance targets. The narrative report is required for report year 2019 for all agencies with their own TAM plan and for group plan sponsors. This document will be attached at the bottom of the A90 form. The document should outline your agency's progress towards the targets you set for 2019 and any conditions during the year that affected your progress. There's no prescribed format for this narrative. If you have any questions, please contact your analyst who can provide more resources. These are the categories that you will see in the A90 form. These sections are broken down into equipment, which represents service vehicles, rolling stock, which represents revenue vehicles, facilities, which represents your passenger stations and other administrative or maintenance facilities, and infrastructure, which doesn't apply to reach reporters as it pertains to rail. In the first section of the A90, you'll report the target percentage of revenue vehicles that will have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark by 2020. The list of vehicle types will populate based on your active modes. If any vehicle type does not apply to your agency, you can check the NA checkbox in the right-hand column, and that row will become grayed out. In the equipment section, you will report the percentage of service vehicles that will have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark in 2020. Again, check NA for service vehicle types that your agency does not operate. In the facility section, you will report the target percentage of facilities that will be below a 3 on the Transit Economics Requirement Model or term scale in 2020. Check the NA box if the facility type does not apply to your agency. At the bottom of the A90, you will upload your agency's narrative report. You can upload the narrative report in most file formats. Now we will cover the RR20 reduced reporting form. This form will include financial, service, and safety data. There are several sections on the RR20 form, including fair revenues and directly generated funds, revenues accrued through a fee agreement, non-federal funds, federal government funds, service data, and safety data. The first section is where you will report financial data. First, you will report the total annual expenses by mode and type of service. This should include all funds expended towards your public transit service. You will separate expenses by funds expended on operations and funds expended on capital. Please note, capital leasing expenses should not be included in either of these totals if you have a B30 form. In that case, the total funds expended at the top of the form will not match the sum of funds expended by mode and type of service, which you enter here. Next, you will report fair revenues by mode and type of service. Fair revenues should include all income received directly from passengers, including cash or prepaid tickets, reduced or subsidized fares, donations made on board the vehicle, and any organization fares such as agreements arranged by colleges or universities. With the updated USOA in effect since report year 2018, agencies are required to report fair revenues in two categories: passenger paid fares and organization paid fares. Passenger paid fares consist of direct fares, including payments such as full adult fares or senior citizen fares. Organization paid fares includes fares earned from organizations who provide a grading service, such as universities, reduced fare reimbursements, or other special contract transit fares. You will then report the total of other directly generated funds in the next section. Some examples of other directly generated funds are advertising revenues, fundraisers, park and ride revenues, or interest on investments. You must provide a detailed description of the funds reported in this section. Agencies should select include donations and insurance recoveries in this field. Insurance recovery should include any insurance payouts, dividends, or rebates, and funds that may be net out for its future bills. The next section on this form is for PT agreement revenues, or revenues accrued through a purchase transportation agreement. You should only report a value in this field if your purchase transportation agreement meets NTD criteria for a full cost contract. This field is for revenues accrued by the seller of transportation services. This will not include passenger fares generated by the service. You should only report a value in this field if you are the seller or operator of purchase transportation. If this field applies to your agency, You will indicate whether the revenues came from another NTD reporting agency or a non-NTD reporting agency. Next, you will report your non-federal funds. This includes local funds, state funds, and other funds. If you report funds under other, you will be required to provide a detailed description of the source of funding. The last portion of the financial data section is the federal funds. You will select the applicable federal funding sources on the left side of the form. Once you do so, fields will populate on the right side of the form for data entry. Once you have determined the appropriate sources, you will enter the data for each federal funding source. As a reminder, you will need to report funds expended on operations and funds expended on capital in separate columns. Please note, if you select another option, such as other FTA funds, other US DOT funds, or other federal funds, you will be required to provide a description of the original source program. Some examples of these other sources may be FHWA funds or Medicaid funds. Next, you will report savers data. You are required to report annual vehicle revenue miles, annual vehicle revenue hours, annual unlinked passenger trips, sponsored trips for demand response and demand taxi modes, and annual vehicles operated at maximum service. Vehicle revenue miles and hours should include the miles and hours when the vehicle is on revenue service and the miles and hours incurred during layover and recovery time. Revenue miles and hours should not include deadhead, operator training, school bus or charter services, or vehicle maintenance testing. Here you will see a table that illustrates what is revenue service, both miles and hours, for demand response. For example, when the vehicle departs from the dispatching point to pick up a passenger, this is not considered revenue miles or hours. However, on the third one on the table, when the vehicle arrives at a pickup point and waits for the passenger, this would be vehicle revenue hours. This next table outlines examples of revenue service for a bus mode. When the bus is traveling on its route during scheduled revenue operation, this would be considered vehicle revenue hours and revenue miles, even if passengers do not board the vehicle. On the fourth row is an example of deadhead. Once the bus arrives at the end of the route and deadheads back to storage lot to park, this is not considered revenue service. You can reference these tables for both demand response and bus in the policy manual starting on page 69. Unlinked passenger trips should represent the total number of boardings on your agency's vehicles while providing public transit. This should be the total boardings for the entire fiscal year that you're reporting on. The last section of the RR20 form is the safety data section. You will report any reportable events that meet one of the following criteria. An event that results in fatality, injury, $25,000 or more in damages, a collision that results in the towing of a transit vehicle or another vehicle involved, or an evacuation for life safety reasons. Fatalities should be reported if they occur within 30 days of the event, and injuries are reported when passengers are transported away from the scene for medical attention. Now we will cover compilation issues with service data. The first is reporting scheduled hours or available service hours instead of actual revenue hours. You should report actual vehicle revenue hours and not scheduled hours. A second common validation issue is reporting vehicle revenue miles based on average route distance. Agencies should be tracking actual revenue miles, not calculating estimate. A third common issue relates to deadhead. Agencies should not include deadhead in annual vehicle revenue miles or annual vehicle revenue hours. Deadhead includes the time in miles when leaving the garage to go to the first point of revenue service, returning to the garage from the last point of revenue service, or any time the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers. If you have a question about what to include in your service totals, please contact your analyst for future guidance.
cover the FFA 10, the Federal Funding Allocation Statistics form. On this form, you report the vehicle revenue miles, hours, ridership, and operating expenses broken down by each UZA you serve. You will complete one FFA 10 form for each mode. UZAs will populate based on your agency's B10 form. If you provide service within one UZA or one non-UZA, you will report all of your service to that area. If you operate in more than one area, you will report all the data statistics for that one route to the UZA or non-UZA that is primarily served. Or you can allocate the data statistics proportionally to UZAs and non-UZAs served. For further information on the serve rules and allocating to different UZAs, please refer to the NTD serve rules in our policy manual. Here, you'll see an example of an FFA 10 form with one UZA. There is one column to enter all of the data. Here's an example of an FFA 10 form with two UZAs. There will be two columns to report the data, one for each UZA. You'll see on the left side of the form each data point that you will report: vehicle revenue hours, or VRH, unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, vehicle revenue miles, or VRM, and operating expenses, or OE. You will first select your UZA reporting method. There are three options: actual data, actual vehicle revenue miles, or other. For actual data, this means your agency tracks 100% of VRH, VRM, UPT, and OE between all of the UZAs that you serve. Actual vehicle revenue miles means that your agency only tracks vehicle revenue miles operating in each UZA. The system will automatically allocate the remaining data points, such as vehicle revenue hours, unlinked passenger trips, and operating expenses, based on your VRM data that you report. The last option is other. This means your agency used another methodology to track data between UZAs, and you must provide a description of this method. If you select actual data, you will need to manually enter the values for your vehicle revenue hours, unlinked passenger trips, vehicle revenue miles, and operating expenses into both UZA columns. If you select actual vehicle revenue miles, you may only report VRM to each UZA. The other data points will be automatically allocated. You will report the amount of VRM in each UZA column. If you select Other, allocate your data accordingly, and then provide a description of your methodology. The last form in the report package is the D10 CEO certification form. This form should be completed by your agency CEO. You'll need to first confirm the accuracy of your NTD report. Next, you will confirm that you report data in accordance with NTD policy and the Uniform System of Accounts. Now, you will review the criteria listed in options A through G and ensure that the data meets the requirements. You will select yes or no for each mode operated. Next is a section of the D10 form that pertains to the ISFD, or Independent Auto Statement for Financial Data. You will first indicate whether or not you have an existing ISFD within the last 10 years. If you completed one last year or have one from the last 10 years, you will select yes to the first question and proceed to the next section. Please note that this was a requirement in the 2018 report year. If you received a waiver in the 2018 report year, your ISFD is required for the 2019 report year. If you do not have an existing ISFD, you will indicate whether or not your agency has a waiver for this audit for the current year. Then, if not, the last question will appear, and you can upload your newly completed ISFD document directly into the system. You will need to complete the date it was completed on and who it was completed by. If you have not completed your audit, please select No to the first 3 questions on the screen and then enter the anticipated completion date in the explanation box. This allows you to explain why the audit has not been completed and when your agency expects to have it completed. Lastly, you will review the data collection method for unlinked passenger trips. There are several methods, the most common being 100% count of unlinked passenger trips. The other options are alternative sampling methods, the NTD sampling method, APC data, or none of the options listed, which you would then provide a description for. Please note, most reduced reporters do not sample for UPT. If you are unsure of what method to select, please consult with your analyst for guidance. Once you determine the method that your agency uses, you will select a choice from the drop-down menu. If using any automatic passenger counters or APC data for UPT for your modes, please check the Used APC Data checkbox, which is a new field this year. This is the last section of the D10 form. Now we'll cover how to submit your agency's NTD report once the forms are completed. Please note that completing the forms in the report package or completing the D10 form does not submit your report. Once the report is finalized, navigate to the report package summary page and select related actions. Please note that only the CEO, CEO delegate, or NTD contact can submit the report. Only the CEO, CEO delegate can submit the original submission. Once related actions is open, select Submit Annual Report Package. If the report is complete and there are no outstanding issues with the data, you will be able to confirm the report package submission by clicking Continue. Once the report is submitted, you will receive a notification that says Action Completed Successfully. You can confirm that the package was submitted if the package is listed as in review rather than in working data on the report package summary page. Lastly, we will cover the validation process and what happens with the report after you submit the original submission. Your assigned NTD analyst will validate your completed report for any deviations from the reporting requirements, missing data, or data irregularities. This includes whether the data fluctuated significantly from the prior report year, if any forms do not contain all necessary information, or if any data elements were reported to the incorrect field. Prior to submitting the report, agencies may take advantage of their resources to reduce the time dedicated to report validation. This includes contacting your analyst prior to submission so that they may review your data in advance. You may also refer to the report checklist included in your welcome packet, which contains common validation errors and other items to look out for before you submit. It is typical for a report to go through a few revision cycles before being closed out. Your analyst will almost always return the original submission for data revisions or clarifications. Once the report is ready to be sent to FDA for approval, it will either be sent as a clean closeout, which means there are no issues with the report, or it will be closed out with issues, which means there are some outstanding issues that could not be resolved prior to the report closeout. These issues are cited in your closeout letter, and your agency will be expected to resolve them by the following report year. Looking ahead to the 2018 report year, you can expect a welcome email from your analyst as your due date approaches. This email will include a packet containing helpful tips as well as the reporter checklist. Your analyst will provide guidance in completing, submitting, and validating the reports until it is closed out. Please do not hesitate to reach out with questions. Thank you very much for tuning in. And again, here's the contact information for the help desk line. We're open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern, and we will now open up the floor for some questions.
if anybody has any questions, you can go right ahead and type it in the Q&A box. Sorry, I'm sniffling right now. One question came in, but it was about whether the presentation would be available, the recording, and I answered that already. So other than that, there haven't been any questions so far. So let's wait and see if anybody starts typing. Someone in the chat did want to know if they could have the PowerPoint. And again, I always defer to the presenters because that's not my material.
It's usually linked on YouTube. So we have one from prior years
Right.
that we can link you to.
We have a link. It's actually on YouTube from the fall presentation as well. We can we'll get that to you if you email your analyst.
Okay, hope that answers that. So I guess we'll just sit in uncomfortable silence for a little while and we see if anybody types a question. If people didn't ask questions, then we'll wrap it up. That was a lot of info.
Well, thank you guys again for tuning in. If you do have any questions, please reach out to your analysts. We'd be more than happy to talk to you guys and help you with anything that you may have trouble with or need clarification on.
All right, doesn't look like anyone is, I never know how long to wait. It's difficult doing it like this, you know? Well, I guess if, oh wait, the nick of time, it says, how will FTA look at reporting from group plan participants? I assume they will report individually, although included in plan.
So for this one, I think we would have to look at your individual situation. So participants, there are two types of participants. So whether you're a managed participant or an independently reporting participant. So if you have specific questions about that, or if you are a group plan sponsor, I'd recommend contacting your analyst so we can look at the plan itself and see how that should be reflected in the NTD system.
Great. Anyone else? I'll wait a little bit longer. Well, I guess worst case scenario, if we end this now, you can always email the address on the screen, which is in the handouts. Again, the link for the handouts was in the chat box. And if your firewall blocks your ability to download that file, you can email my colleague Andrea Dixon. Her email is also in the chat and was probably on the email you got giving you the information to log in. So I guess I will stop babbling and I will wrap up. Thank you everyone for participating in this afternoon's webinar. A special thank you to Matt and Brandon for their informative presentation. As a reminder, everyone will be receiving an invitation to fill out a survey evaluation. Please just take a couple minutes and fill that out. It's very helpful to us. So thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye. Bye-bye.